Part 1 of The Highest Treason. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Highest Treason by Randall Garrett. Part 1. The Prisoner. The 2 rooms were not luxurious, but McMain hadn't expected that they would be. The walls were a flat metallic gray, unadorned and windowless. The ceilings and floors were simply continuations of the walls, except for the glow plates overhead. One room held a small cabinet for his personal possessions, a wide, reasonably soft bed, a small but adequate desk, and in one corner a cubicle that contained the necessary sanitary plumbing facilities. The other room held a couch, 2 big easy chairs, a low table, some bookshelves, a squat refrigerator containing food and drink for his occasional snacks — his regular meals were brought in hot from the main kitchen — and a closet that contained his clothing, the insignialess uniforms of a Kerothi officer. No, thought Sebastian McMain, it was not luxurious, but neither did it look like the prison cell it was. There was comfort here, and even the illusion of privacy, although there were TV pickups in the walls, placed so that no movement in either room would go unnoticed. The switch which cut off the soft white light from the glow plates did not cut off the infrared radiation which enabled his host to watch him while he slept. Every sound was heard and recorded. But none of that bothered McMain. On the contrary, he was glad of it. He wanted the Kerothi to know that he had no intention of escaping or hatching any plot against them. He had long since decided that, if things continued as they had, Earth would lose the war with Keroth, and Sebastian McMain had no desire whatever to be on the losing side of the greatest war ever fought. The problem now was to convince the Kerothi that he fully intended to fight with them, to give them the full benefit of his ability as a military strategist, to do his best to win every battle for Keroth. And that was going to be the most difficult task of all. A telltale glow of red blinked rapidly over the door, and a soft chime pinged in time with it. McMain smiled inwardly, although not a trace of it showed on his broad-jawed, blocky face. To give him the illusion that he was a guest rather than a prisoner, the Kerothi had installed an announcer at the door, and invariably used it. Not once had any one of them ever simply walked in on him. "Come in," McMain said. He was seated in one of the easy chairs in his living room, smoking a cigarette and reading a book on the history of Keroth, but he put the book down on the low table as a tall Kerothi came in through the doorway. McMain allowed himself a smile of honest pleasure. To most Earthmen, all the carrot skins look alike, and McMain admitted honestly to himself he hadn't yet trained himself completely to look beyond the strangeness that made the Kerothi different from Earthmen and see the details that made them different from each other. But this was one Kerothi that McMain would never mistake for any other. Tallis. He stood up and extended both hands in the Kerothi fashion. The other did the same, and they clasped hands for a moment. "How are your guts?" he added in Kerothic. "They function smoothly, my sibling by choice," answered Space General Poland Tallis. "And your own?" "Smoothly indeed. It's been far too long a time since we have touched." The Kerothi stepped back a pace and looked the Earthman up and down. "You look healthy enough for a prisoner. You're treated well, then?" "Well enough. Sit down, my sibling by choice." McMain waved toward the couch nearby. The general sat down and looked around the apartment. "Well, well, you're getting preferential treatment, all right. This is as good as you could expect as a battleship commander. Maybe you're being trained for the job." McMain laughed, allowing the touch of sardonicism that he felt to be heard in the laughter. "I might have hoped so once, Tallis, but I'm afraid I have simply come out even. I have traded nothing for nothing." General Tallis reached into the pocket of his uniform jacket and took out the thin aluminum case that held the Kerothi equivalent of cigarettes. He took one out, put it between his lips, and lit it with the hot point that was built into the case. McMain took an earth cigarette out of the package on the table and allowed Tallis to light it for him. The pause and the silence, McMain knew, were for a purpose. He waited. Tallis had something to say, but he was allowing the Earthman to adjust to surprise. It was one of the fine points of Karothi etiquette. A sudden silence on the part of one participant in a conversation under these particular circumstances meant that something unusual was coming up, and the other person was supposed to take the opportunity to brace himself for shock. It could mean anything. In the Karothi Space Forces, a superior informed a junior officer of the junior's forthcoming promotion by just such tactics. But the same tactics were used when informing a person of the death of a loved one. In fact, McMain was well aware that such a period of silence was de rigueur in a Karothi court, just before sentence was pronounced, as well as a preliminary to a proposal of marriage by a Karothi male to the light of his love. McMain could do nothing but wait. It would be indelicate to speak until Tallis felt that he was ready for the surprise. It was not, however, indelicate to watch Tallis's face closely. It was expected. Theoretically, one was supposed to be able to discern at least whether the news was good or bad. With Tallis, it was impossible to tell, and McMain knew it would be useless to read the man's expression, but he watched nonetheless. In one way, Tallis's face was typically Karothi. The orange pigmented skin and the bright grass-green eyes were common to all Karothi. The planet Karoth, like Earth, had evolved several different races of humanoid, but unlike Earth, the distinction was not one of color. McMain took a drag off his cigarette and forced himself to keep his mind off whatever it was that Tallis might be about to say. He was already prepared for a death sentence, even a death sentence by torture. Now, he felt, he could not be shocked, and rather than build up the tension within himself to an unbearable degree, he thought about Tallis rather than about himself. Tallis, like the rest of the Karothi, was unbelievably humanoid. There were internal differences in the placement of organs, and differences in the functions of those organs. For instance, it took 2 separate organs to perform the same function that the liver performed in Earthmen, and the kidneys were completely absent, that function being performed by special tissues in the lower colon, which meant that the Karothi were more efficient with water-saving than Earthmen, since the waste products were excreted as relatively dry solids through an all-purpose cloaca. But externally, a Karothi would need only a touch of plastic surgery and some makeup to pass as an Earthman in a stage play. Close up, of course, the job would be much more difficult as a Negro trying to disguise himself as a Swede or vice versa. But Tallis was... "I would have a word," Tallis said, shattering McMain's carefully neutral train of thought. It was a standard opening for breaking the pause of adjustment, but it presaged good news rather than bad. "I await your word," McMain said. Even after all this time, he still felt vaguely proud of his ability to handle the subtle idioms of Karothic. "I think," Tallis said carefully, "that you may be offered a commission in the Karothi Space Forces." Sebastian McMain let out his breath slowly, and only then realized that he had been holding it. "I am grateful, my sibling by choice," he said. General Tallis tapped his cigarette ash into a large blue ceramic ashtray. McMain could smell the acrid smoke from the alien plant matter that burned in the Karothi cigarette, a chopped-up inner bark from a Karothi tree. McMain could no more smoke a Karothi cigarette than Tallis could smoke tobacco, but the two were remarkably similar in their effects. The surprise had been delivered. Now, as was proper, Tallis would move adroitly all around the subject until he was ready to return to it again. "You have been with us... how long, Sebastian?" he asked. 2 1/3 Kronet. Tallis nodded. "Nearly a year of your time." McMain smiled. Tallis was as proud of his knowledge of Earth terminology as McMain was proud of his mastery of Karothic. "Lacking 3 weeks," McMain said. "What? 3... oh, yes. "Well, a long time," said Tallis. "Damn it," McMain thought in a sudden surge of impatience. "Get to the point!" His face showed only calm. "The Board of Strategy asked me to tell you," Tallis continued. "After all, my recommendation was partially responsible for the decision." He paused for a moment, but it was merely a conversational hesitation, not a formal hiatus. "It was a hard decision, Sebastian. You must realize that. We have been at war with your race for 10 years now. We have taken thousands of Earthmen as prisoners, and many of them have agreed to cooperate with us. But with one single exception, these prisoners have been the moral dregs of your civilization. They have been men who had no pride of race, no pride of society, no pride of self. They have been weak, self-centered, small-minded cowards who had no thought for Earth and Earthmen, but only for themselves. Not," he said hurriedly, "that all of them are that way, or even the majority. Most of them have the minds of warriors, although I must say, not strong warriors." That last, McMain knew, was a polite concession. The Kerothi had no respect for Earthmen, and McMain could hardly blame them. For 3 long centuries, the people of Earth had had nothing to do but indulge themselves in the pleasures of material wealth. It was a wonder that any of them had any moral fiber left. "But none of those who had any strength agreed to work with us," Tallis went on, "with one exception. You." "Am I weak, then?" McMain asked. General Tallis shook his head in a peculiarly human-like gesture. "No. No, you are not. And that is what has made us pause for 3 years." His grass-green eyes looked candidly into McMain's own. "You aren't the type of person who betrays his own kind. It looks like a trap. After a whole year, the Board of Strategy still isn't sure that there is no trap." Tallis stopped, leaned forward, and ground out the stub of his cigarette in the blue ashtray. Then his eyes again sought McMain's. "If it were not for what I personally know about you, the Board of Strategy would not even consider your proposition." "I take it, then, that they have considered it?" McMain asked with a grin. "As I said, Sebastian," Tallis said, "you have won your case. After almost a year of your time, your decision has been justified." McMain lost his grin. "I am grateful, Tallis," he said gravely. "I think you must realize that it was a difficult decision to make." His thoughts went back, across long months of time and longer light years of space, to the day when that decision had been made. End of Part 1. Part 2 of The Highest Treason. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Highest Treason by Randall Garrett. Part 2. The Decision. Colonel Sebastian McMain didn't feel that morning as though this day were different from any other. The sun, faintly veiled by a few wisps of cloud, shone as it always had. The guards at the doors of the Space Force Administration Building saluted him as usual. His brother officers nodded politely, as they always did. His aide greeted him with the usual, "Good morning, sir." The duty list lay on his desk as it had every morning for years. Sebastian McMain felt tense and a little irritated with himself, but he felt nothing that could be called a premonition. When he read the first item on the duty list, his irritation became a little stronger. Interrogate Kerothi General. The interrogation duty had swung round to him again. He didn't want to talk to General Tallis. There was something about the alien that bothered him, and he couldn't place exactly what it was. Earth had been lucky to capture the alien officer. In a space war, there's usually very little left to capture after a battle, especially if your side lost the battle. On the other hand, the Kerothi general wasn't so lucky. the food that had been captured with him would run out in less than 6 months, and it was doubtful that he would survive on Earth food. It was equally doubtful that any more Karothi food would be captured. For 2 years, Earth had been fighting the Karothi, and for 2 years, Earth had been winning a few minor skirmishes and losing the major battles. The Karothi hadn't hit any of the major colonies yet, but they had swallowed up outpost after outpost, and Earth's space fleet was losing ships faster than her factories could turn them out. The hell of it was that nobody on Earth seemed to be very much concerned about it at all. McMain wondered why he let it concern him. If no one else was worried, why did he let it bother him? He pushed the thought from his mind and picked up the questionnaire form that had been made out for that morning's session with the Karothi general. Might as well get it over with. He glanced down the list of further duties for the day. It looked as though the routine interrogation of the Karothi general was likely to provide most of the interest in the day's work at that. He took the drop chute down to the basement of the building to the small prison section where the alien officer was being held. The guards saluted nonchalantly as he went in. The routine questioning sessions were nothing new to them. McMain turned the lock on the prisoner's cell door and went in. Then he came to attention and saluted the Karothi general. He was probably the only officer in the place who did that, he knew. The others treated the alien general as though he were a criminal. Worse, they treated him as though he were a petty thief or a common pickpocket. Criminal, yes, but of a definitely inferior type. General Tallis, as always, stood and returned the salute. "Katmonik, Colonel McMain," he said. The Karothi language lacked many of the voiced consonants of English and Russian, and as a result, Tallis's use of B, D, G, J, V, and Z made them come out as P, T, K, C, H, F, and S. The English R, as it is pronounced in run or rat, eluded him entirely, and he pronounced it only when he could give it the guttural pronunciation of the German R. The terminal NG always came out as NK. The nasal M and N were a little more drawn out than in English, but they were easily understandable. "Good morning, General Tallis," McMain said. "Sit down. How do you feel this morning?" The general sat again on the hard bunk that, aside from the single chair, was the only furniture in the small cell. "As well as could be expected. I get very little exercise. How is it said? I become soft. Soft is correct?" "Correct. You've learned our language very well for so short a time." The general shrugged off the compliment. "When it is a matter of learn in order to survive, one learns." "You think, then, that your survival has depended on your learning our language?" The general's orange face contrived a wry smile. "Obviously. Your people will not learn Karothic. If I can't answer questions, I am of no use. As long as I am of use, I will live. Not?" McMain decided he might as well spring his bomb on the Karothi officer now as later. "I am not so certain but that you might have stretched out your time longer if you had forced us to learn Karothic, General," he said, in Karothic. He knew his Karothic was bad, since it had been learned from the Karothi spaceman who had been captured with the general, and the man had been badly wounded and had survived only 2 weeks. But that little bit of basic instruction, plus the work he had done on the books and tapes from the ruined Karothi ship, had helped him. "Ah?" The general blinked in surprise. Then he smiled. "Your accent," he said in Karothic, "is atrocious, but certainly no worse than mine when I speak your Inklich. I suppose you intend to question me in Karothic now, eh? In the hope that I may reveal more in my own tongue." "Possibly you may," McMain said with a grin, "but I learned it from my own information." "For your own what?" "Oh, I see. Interesting. I know no others of your race who would do such a thing. Anything which is difficult is beneath them." "Not so, General. I'm not unique. There are many of us who don't think that way." The general shrugged. "I do not deny it. I merely say that I have met none. Certainly they do not tend to go into military service. Possibly that is because you are not a race of fighters. It takes a fighter to tackle the difficult just because it is difficult." McMain gave him a short, hard laugh. "Don't you think getting information out of you is difficult? And yet we tackle that." "Not the same thing at all. Routine. You have used no pressure, no threats, no promises, no torture, no stress." McMain wasn't quite sure of his translation of the last two negative phrases. "You mean the application of physical pain? That's barbaric." "I won't pursue the subject," the general said with sudden irony. "I can understand that, but you can rest assured that we would never do such a thing. It isn't civilized. Our civil police do use certain drugs to obtain information, but we have so little knowledge of Karothi body chemistry that we hesitate to use drugs on you." "The application of stress, you say, is not civilized. Not perhaps according to your definition of," he used the English word, "civilized. No, not civilized. But it works." Again he smiled. "I said that I have become soft since I have been here, but I fear that your civilization is even softer." "A man can lie even if his arms are pulled off or his feet crushed," McMain said stiffly. The Karothi looked startled. When he spoke again, it was in English. "I will say no more. If you have questions to ask, go ahead. I will not take up time with further talking." A little angry with himself and with the general, McMain spent the rest of the hour asking routine questions and getting nowhere, filling up the tape in his mini-quarter with the same old answers that others had gotten. He left, giving the general a brisk salute and turning before the general had time to return it. Back in his office, he filed the tape dutifully and started on item 2 of the duty list: strategy analysis of battle reports. Strategy analysis always irritated and upset him. He knew that if he'd just go about it in the approved way, there would be no irritation, only boredom. But he was constitutionally incapable of working that way. In spite of himself, he always played a little game with himself and with the general strategy computer. The only battle of significance in the past week had been the defense of an Earth outpost called Bennington 4. Theoretically, McMain was supposed to check over the entire report, find out where the losing side had erred, and feed correctional information into the computer. But he couldn't resist stopping after he had read the first section: information known to Earth Commander at moment of initial contact. Then he would stop and consider how he personally would have handled the situation if he had been the Earth Commander. So many ships in such and such places. Enemy fleet approaching at such and such velocities. Battle array of enemy, thus and so. Now what? McMain thought over the information on the defense of Bennington 4 and devised a battle plan. There was a weak point in the enemy's attack, but it was rather obvious. McMain searched until he found another weak point, much less obvious than the first. He knew it would be there. It was. Then he proceeded to ignore both weak points and concentrate on what he would do if he were the enemy commander. The weak points were traps. The computer could see them and avoid them, which was just exactly what was wrong with the computer's logic. In avoiding the traps, it also avoided the best way to hit the enemy. A weak point is weak, no matter how well it may be booby-trapped. In baiting a rat trap, you have to use real cheese because an imitation won't work. Of course, McMain thought to himself, you can always poison the cheese, but let's not carry the analogy too far. All right, then. How to hit the traps. It took him half an hour to devise a completely wacky and unorthodox way of hitting the holes in the enemy advance. He checked the time carefully because there's no point in devising a strategy if the battle is too far gone to use it by the time you figured it out. Then he went ahead and read the rest of the report. Earth had lost the outpost, and worse, McMain's strategy would have won the battle if it had been used. He fed it through his small office computer to make sure. The odds were good. And that was the thing that made McMain hate strategy analysis. Too often he won. Too often Earth lost. A computer was fine for working out the logical outcome of a battle if it was given the proper strategy, but it couldn't devise anything new. Colonel McMain had tried to get himself transferred to space duty, but without success. The commanding staff didn't want him out there. The trouble was that they didn't believe McMain actually devised his strategy before he read the complete report. How could anyone outthink a computer? He'd offered to prove it. "Give me a problem," he'd told his immediate superior, General Matsukuo. "Give me the initial contact information of a battle I haven't seen before, and I'll show you." And Matsukuo had said testily, "Colonel, I will not permit a member of my staff to make a fool of himself in front of the commanding staff. Setting yourself up as someone superior to the strategy board is the most antisocial type of egocentrism imaginable. You were given the same education at the academy as every other officer. What makes you think you are better than they? As time goes on, your automatic promotions will put you in a position to vote on such matters, provided you don't prejudice the promotion board against you by antisocial behavior. I hold you in the highest regard, Colonel, and I will say nothing to the promotion board about this, but if you persist, I will have to do my duty. Now, I don't want to hear any more about it. Is that clear?" It was. All McMain had to do was wait, and he'd automatically be promoted to the commanding staff, where he would have an equal vote with the others of his rank. 1 unit vote to begin with, and an additional unit for every year thereafter. It's a great system for running a peacetime social club, maybe, McMain thought, but it's no way to run a fighting force. Maybe the Karathide general was right. Maybe Homo sapiens just wasn't a race of fighters. They had been once. Mankind had fought its way to domination of Earth by battling every other form of life on the planet, from the smallest virus to the biggest carnivore. The fight against disease was still going on, as a matter of fact, and man was still fighting the elemental fury of Earth's climate. But man no longer fought with man. Was that a bad thing? The discovery of atomic energy 2 centuries before had literally made war impossible if the race was to survive. Small struggles bred bigger struggles, or so the reasoning went. Therefore, the society had unconsciously sought to eliminate the reasons for struggle. What bred the hatreds and jealousies among men? What caused one group to fight another? Society had decided that intolerance and hatred were caused by inequality. The jealousy of the inferior toward his superior, the scorn of the superior toward his inferior. The have-not envies the have, and the have looks down upon the have-not. Then, let us eliminate the have-not. Let us make sure that everyone is a have. Raise the standard of living. Make sure that every human being has the necessities of life: food, clothing, shelter, proper medical care, and proper education. More, give them the luxuries, too. Let no man be without anything that is poorer in quality or less in quantity than the possessions of any other. There was no longer any middle class, simply because there were no other classes for it to be in the middle of. "The poor you will have always with you," Jesus of Nazareth had said. But in a material sense, that was no longer true. The poor were gone, and so were the rich. But the poor in mind and the poor in spirit were still there, in ever-increasing numbers. Material wealth could be evenly distributed, but it could not remain that way unless society made sure that the man who was more clever than the rest could not increase his wealth at the expense of his less fortunate brethren. Make it a social stigma to show more ability than the average. Be kind to your fellow man. Don't show him up as a stupid clod, no matter how cloddish he may be. All men are created equal, and let's make sure they stay that way. There could be no such thing as a classless society, of course. That was easily seen. No human being could do everything, learn everything, be everything. There had to be doctors and lawyers and policemen and bartenders and soldiers and machinists and laborers and actors and writers and criminals and bums. But let's make sure that the differentiation between classes is horizontal, not vertical. As long as a person does his job the best he can, he's as good as anybody else. A doctor is as good as a lawyer, isn't he? Then a garbage collector is just as good as a nuclear physicist, and an astronomer is no better than a street sweeper. And what of the loafer, the bum, the man who's too lazy or weak-willed to put out any more effort than is absolutely necessary to stay alive? Well, my goodness, the poor chap can't help it, can he? It isn't his fault, is it? He has to be helped. There is always something he is both capable of doing and willing to do. Does he like to sit around all day and do nothing but watch television? Then give him a sheet of paper with all the programs on it, and 2 little boxes marked yes and no, and he can put an X in one or the other to indicate whether he likes the program or not. Useful? Certainly. All these sheets can be tallied up in order to find out what sort of program the public likes to see. After all, his vote is just as good as anyone else's, isn't it? And a program analyst is just as good, just as important, and just as well cared for as anyone else. And what about the criminal? Well, what is a criminal? A person who thinks he's superior to others. A thief steals because he thinks he has more right to something than its real owner. A man kills because he has an idea that he has a better right to live than someone else. In short, a man breaks the law because he feels superior, because he thinks he can outsmart society and the law, or simply because he thinks he can outsmart the policeman on the beat. Obviously, that sort of antisocial behavior can't be allowed. The poor fellow who thinks he's better than anyone else has to be segregated from normal society and treated for his aberrations. But not punished. Heavens, no! His erratic behavior isn't his fault, is it? It was axiomatic that there had to be some sort of vertical structure to society naturally. A child can't do the work of an adult, and a beginner can't be as good as an old hand. Aside from the fact that it was actually impossible to force everyone into a common mold, it was recognized that there had to be some incentive for staying with a job. What to do? The labor unions had solved that problem 200 years before. Promotion by seniority. Stick with a job long enough, and you'll automatically rise to the top. That way, everyone had as good a chance as everyone else. Promotion tables for individual jobs were worked out on the basis of longevity tables, so that by the time a man reached the automatic retirement age, he was automatically at the highest position he could hold. No fuss, no bother, no trouble. Just keep your nose clean and live as long as possible. It eliminated struggle. It eliminated the petty jockeying for position that undermined efficiency in an organization. Everybody deserves an equal chance in life, so make sure everybody gets it. Colonel Sebastian McMain had been born and reared in that society. He could see many of its faults, but he didn't have the orientation to see all of them. As he'd grown older, he'd seen that, regardless of the position a man held according to seniority, a smart man could exercise more power than those above him if he did it carefully. A man is a slave if he is held rigidly in a pattern and not permitted to step out of that pattern. In ancient times, a slave was born at the bottom of the social ladder, and he remained there all his life. Only rarely did a slave of exceptional merit manage to rise above his assigned position. But a man who is forced to remain on the bottom step of a stationary stairway is no more a slave than a man who is forced to remain on a given step of an escalator, and no less so. Slavery, however, has 2 advantages. One for the individual, and one which, in the long run, can be good for the race. For the individual, it offers security, and that is the goal which by far the greater majority of mankind seeks. The second advantage is more difficult to see. It operates only in favor of the exceptional individual. There are always individuals who aspire to greater heights than the one they occupy at any given moment, but in a slave society they are slapped back into place if they act hastily. Just as the one-eyed man in the kingdom of the blind can be king if he taps the ground with a cane, so the gifted individual can gain his ends in a slave society, provided he thinks out the consequences of any act in advance. The law of gravity is a universal edict which enslaves, in a sense, every particle of matter in the cosmos. The man who attempts to defy the injustice of that law by ignoring the consequences of its enforcement will find himself punished rather severely. It may be unjust that a bird can fly under its own muscle power, but a man who tries to correct that injustice by leaping out of a skyscraper window and flapping his arms vigorously will find that overt defiance of the law of gravity brings very serious penalties indeed. The wise man seeks the loopholes in the law, and loopholes are caused by other laws which counteract, not defy, the given law. A balloon full of hydrogen falls up in obedience to the law of gravity. A contradiction? A paradox? No. It is the law of gravity which causes the density and pressure of a planet's atmosphere to decrease with altitude, and that decrease in pressure forces the balloon upwards until the balance point between atmospheric density and the internal density of the balloon is reached. The illustration may seem obvious and elementary to the modern man, but it seems so only because he understands, at least to some extent, the laws involved. It was not obvious to even the most learned man of, say, the 13th century. Slavery, too, has its laws, and it is as dangerous to defy the laws of a society as it is to defy those of nature, and the only way to escape the punishment resulting from those laws is to find the loopholes. One of the most basic laws of any society is so basic that it is never, ever written down. And that law, like all basic laws, is so simple in expression and so obvious in application that any man above the moron level has an intuitive grasp of it. It is the first law one learns as a child. Thou shalt not suffer thyself to be caught. The unthinking man believes that this basic law can be applied by breaking the laws of his society in secret. What he fails to see is that such lawbreaking requires such a fantastic network of lies, subterfuges, evasions, and chicanery that the structure itself eventually breaks down and his guilt is obvious to all. The very steps he has taken to keep from getting caught eventually become signposts that point unerringly at the lawbreaker himself. Like the loopholes in the law of gravity, the loopholes in the laws of society cannot entail a defiance of the law. Only compliance with those laws will be ultimately successful. The wise man works within the framework of the law, not only the written but the unwritten law of his society. In a slave society, any slave who openly rebels will find that he gets squashed pretty quickly. But many a slave owner has danced willingly to the tune of a slave who was wiser and cleverer than he, without ever knowing that the tune played was not his own. And that is the second advantage of slavery. It teaches the exceptional individual to think. When a wise, intelligent individual openly and violently breaks the laws of his society, there are two things which are almost certain. One, he knows that there is no other way to do the thing he feels must be done, and, two, he knows that he will pay the penalty for his crime in one way or another. Sebastian McMain knew the operations of those laws. As a member of a self-enslaved society, he knew that to betray any sign of intelligence was dangerous. A slight slip could bring the scorn of the slaves around him. A major offense could mean death. The war with Keroth had thrown him slightly off balance, but after his one experience with General Matsukuo, he had quickly regained his equilibrium. At the end of his workday, McMain closed his desk and left his office precisely on time, as usual. Working overtime, except in the gravest emergencies, was looked upon as anti-socialism. The offender was suspected of having ambition, obviously a bad thing. It was during his meal at the officers' mess that Colonel Sebastian McMain heard the statement that triggered the decision in his mind. There were 3 other officers seated with McMain around one of the 4-place tables in the big room. McMain only paid enough attention to the table conversation to be able to make the appropriate noises at the proper times. He had long since learned to do his thinking under cover of general banalities. Colonel Van Dusen was a man who would never have made private first class in an army that operated on a strict merit system. His thinking was muddy, and his conversation betrayed it. All he felt comfortable in talking about was just exactly what he had been taught: slogans, banalities, and bromides. He knew his catechism, and he knew it was safe. "What I mean is, we got nothing to worry about. We all stick together, and we can do anything. As long as we don't rock the boat, we'll come through okay." "Sure," said Major Brock, looking up from his plate in blank-faced surprise. "I mean, who says different?" "Guy on my research team," said Van Dusen, plying his fork industriously. "A wise guy, second Louis, one of them." "Oh," said the Major knowingly. "One of them." He went back to his meal. "What'd he say?" McMain asked, just to keep his oar in. Nothing serious, I guess," said Van Dusen around a mouthful of steak. "Said we were all clogged up with paperwork, making reports on tests, things like that. Said, why don't we figure out something to pop those carrot skins out of the sky? So I said to him, 'Look, Lieutenant,' I said, 'you got your job to do, I got mine. If the paperwork's piling up,' I said, 'it's because somebody isn't pulling his share. And it better not be you,' I said." He chuckled and speared another cube of steak with his fork. That settled him down. He's all right, though. Young yet, you know. Soon's he gets the hang of how the Space Force operates, he'll be okay. Since Van Dusen was the senior officer at the table, the others listened respectfully as he talked, only inserting a word now and then to show that they were listening. McMain was thinking deeply about something else entirely, but Van Dusen's influence intruded a little. McMain was wondering what it was that bothered him about General Tallis, the Karothi prisoner. The alien was pleasant enough in spite of his position. He seemed to accept his imprisonment as one of the fortunes of war. He didn't threaten or bluster, although he tended to maintain an air of superiority that would have been unbearable in an Earthman. Was that the reason for his uneasiness in the General's presence? No. McMain could accept the reason for that attitude. The General's background was different from that of an Earthman, and therefore he could not be judged by terrestrial standards. Besides, McMain could acknowledge to himself that Tallis was superior to the norm. Not only to the norm of Karoth, but that of Earth. McMain wasn't sure he could have acknowledged superiority in another Earthman, in spite of the fact that he knew there must be men who were his superiors in one way or another. Because of his social background, he knew that he would probably form an intense and instant dislike for any Earthman who talked the way Tallis did, but he found that he actually liked the alien officer. It came as a slight shock when the realization hit McMain that his liking for the General was exactly why he was uncomfortable around him. Damn it, a man isn't supposed to like his enemy, and most especially when that enemy does and says things that one would despise in a friend. Come to think of it, though, did he, McMain, actually have any friends? He looked around him, suddenly clearly conscious of all the other men in the room. He searched through his memory, thinking of all his acquaintances and relatives. It was an even greater shock to realize that he would not be more than faintly touched emotionally if any or all of them were to die at that instant. Even his parents, both of whom were now dead, were only dim figures in his memory. He had mourned them when an aircraft accident had taken both of them when he was only 11, but he found himself wondering if it had been the loss of loved ones that had caused his emotional upset, or simply the abrupt vanishing of a kind of security he had taken for granted. And yet he felt that the death of General Poland Tallis would leave an empty place in his life. Colonel Van Dusen was still holding forth. "So I told him, I said, 'Look, Lieutenant,' I said, 'don't rock the boat. You're a kid yet, you know,' I said. 'You got equal rights with everybody else,' I said, 'but if you rock the boat, you aren't gonna get along so well. You just behave yourself,' I said, 'and pull your share of the load and do your job right and keep your nose clean, and you'll come out all right. Time I get to be on the general staff,' I told him, 'why, you'll be taking over my job, maybe. That's the way it works,' I said. He's a good kid. I mean, he's a fresh young punk, that's all. He'll learn okay. He'll climb right up once he's got the right attitude. Why, when I was—" But McMain was no longer listening. It was astonishing to realize that what Van Dusen had said was perfectly true. A blockhead like Van Dusen would simply be lifted to a position of higher authority, only to be replaced by another blockhead. There would be no essential change in the status quo. The Karothi were winning steadily, and the people of Earth and her colonies were making no changes whatever in their way of living. The majority of people were too blind to be able to see what was happening, and the rest were afraid to admit the danger even to themselves. It required no great understanding of strategy to see what the inevitable outcome must be. At some point in the last few centuries, human civilization had taken the wrong path, a path that led only to oblivion. It was at that moment that Colonel Sebastian McMain made his decision. End of Part 2. Part 3 of The Highest Treason. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Highest Treason by Randall Garrett. Part 3, The Escape. "Are you sure you understand, Tallis?" McMain asked in Karothic. The alien general nodded emphatically. "Perfectly. Your Karothic is not so bad that I could misunderstand your instructions. I still don't understand why you are doing this. Oh, I know the reasons you've given me, but I don't completely believe them. However, I'll go along with you. The worst that could happen would be for me to be killed, and I would sooner face death in trying to escape than in waiting for your executioners. If this is some sort of trap, some sort of weird way your race's twisted idea of kindness has evolved to dispose of me, then I'll accept your sentence. It's better than starving to death, or facing a firing squad." "Not a firing squad," McMain said. "That wouldn't be kind. An odorless but quite deadly gas would be pumped into this cell while you slept." "That's worse. When death comes, I want to face it and fight it off as long as possible, not have it sneaking up on me in my sleep. I think I'd rather starve." "You would," said McMain. "The food that was captured with you has nearly run out, and we haven't been able to capture any more. But rather than let you suffer, they would have killed you painlessly." He glanced at the watch on his instrument cuff. "Almost time." McMain looked the alien over once more. Tallis was dressed in the uniform of Earth Space Force, and the insignia of a full general gleamed on his collar. His face and hands had been sprayed with an opaque pink-tan film, and his hairless head was covered with a black wig. He wouldn't pass a close inspection, but McMain fervently hoped that he wouldn't need to. Think it out, be sure you're right, then go ahead. Sebastian McMain had done just that. For 3 months he had worked over the details of his plan, making sure that they were as perfect as he was capable of making them. Even so, there was a great deal of risk involved, and there were too many details that required luck for McMain to be perfectly happy about the plan. But time was running out. As the General's food supply dwindled, his execution date neared, and now it was only 2 days away. There was no point in waiting until the last minute. It was now or never. There were no spying TV cameras in the General's cell, no hidden microphones to report and record what went on. No one had ever escaped from the Space Force's prison, therefore no one ever would. McMain glanced again at his watch. It was time. He reached inside his blouse and took out a fully loaded handgun. For an instant, the alien officer's eyes widened, and he stiffened as if he were ready to die in an attempt to disarm the Earthman. Then he saw that McMain wasn't holding it by the butt. His hand was clasped around the middle of the weapon. "This is a chance I have to take," McMain said evenly. "With this gun, you can shoot me down right here and try to escape alone. I've told you every detail of our course of action, and with luck, you might make it alone." He held out his hand with the weapon resting on his open palm. General Tallis eyed the Earthman for a long second. Then, without haste, he took the gun and inspected it with a professional eye. "Do you know how to operate it?" McMain asked, forcing calmness into his voice. "Yes, we've captured plenty of them." Tallis thumbed the stud that allowed the magazine to slide out of the button into his hand. Then he checked the mechanism and the power cartridges. Finally, he replaced the magazine and put the weapon into the empty sleeve holster that McMain had given him. McMain let his breath out slowly. "All right," he said. "Let's go." He opened the door of the cell and both men stepped out into the corridor. At the far end of the corridor, some 30 yards away, stood the 2 armed guards who kept watch over the prisoner. At that distance, it was impossible to tell that Tallis was not what he appeared to be. The guard had been changed while McMain was in the prisoner's cell, and he was relying on the lax discipline of the soldiers to get him and Tallis out of the cell block. With luck, the guards would have failed to listen too closely to what they had been told by the men they replaced. With even greater luck, the previous guardsman would have failed to be too explicit about who was in the prisoner's cell. With no luck at all, McMain would be forced to shoot to kill. McMain walked casually up to the 2 men, who came to an easy attention. "I want you 2 men to come with me. Something odd has happened, and General Quimby and I want 2 witnesses as to what went on." "What happened, sir?" one of them asked. "Don't know for sure," McMain said in a puzzled voice. "The General and I were talking to the prisoner when all of a sudden he fell over. I think he's dead. I couldn't find a heartbeat. I want you to take a look at him so that you can testify that we didn't shoot him or anything." Obediently, the 2 guards headed for the cell, and McMain fell in behind them. "You couldn't have shot him, sir," said the second guard confidently. "We would have heard the shot." "Besides," said the other, "it don't matter much. He was going to be gassed day after tomorrow." As the trio approached the cell, Tallis pulled the door open a little wider, and in doing so contrived to put himself behind it so that his face couldn't be seen. The young guards weren't too awed by a full general. After all, they'd be generals themselves someday. They were much more interested in seeing the dead alien. As the guards reached the cell door, McMain unholstered his pistol from his sleeve and brought it down hard on the head of the nearest youth. At the same time, Tallis stepped from behind the door and clouted the other. Quickly, McMain disarmed the fallen men and dragged them into the open cell. He came out again and locked the door securely. Their guns were tossed into an empty cell nearby. "They won't be missed until the next change of watch in 4 hours," McMain said. "By then it won't matter one way or another." Getting out of the huge building that housed the administrative offices of the Space Force was relatively easy. A lift chute brought the pair to the main floor, and, this late in the evening, there weren't many people on that floor. The officers and men who had night duty were working on the upper floors. Several times Tallis had to take a handkerchief from his pocket and pretend to blow his nose in order to conceal his alien features from someone who came too close, but no one appeared to notice anything out of the ordinary. As they walked out boldly through the main door 15 minutes later, the guards merely came to attention and relaxed as a tall colonel and a somewhat shorter general strode out. The general appeared to be having a fit of sneezing, and the colonel was heard to say, "That's quite a cold you've picked up, sir. Better get over to the dispensary and pick up an anti-coryza shot." Said the general. Getting to the spaceport was no problem at all. McMain had an official car waiting, and the two sergeants in the front seat didn't pay any attention to the general getting in the back seat because Colonel McMain was talking to them. "We're ready to roll, Sergeant," he said to the driver. "General Quimby wants to go straight to the Manila, so let's get there as fast as possible. Takeoff is scheduled in 10 minutes. Then he got into the back seat himself. The one-way glass partition that separated the back seat from the front prevented either of the two men from looking back at their passengers. 7 minutes later, the staff car was rolling unquestioned through the main gate of Waikiki Spaceport. It was all so incredibly easy, McMain thought. Nobody questioned an official car. Nobody checked anything too closely. Nobody wanted to risk his lifelong security by doing or saying something that might be considered antisocial by a busy general. Besides, it never entered anyone's mind that there could be anything wrong. If there was a war on, apparently no one had been told about it yet. McMain thought, was I ever that stubbornly blind? Not quite, I guess, or I'd never have seen what is happening. But he knew he hadn't been too much more perceptive than those around him. Even to an intelligent man, the mask of stupidity can become a barrier to the outside world, as well as a concealment from it. The interstellar ship Manila was a small, fast, 10-man blaster boat designed to get into the thick of a battle quickly, strike hard, and get away. Unlike the bigger, more powerful battle cruisers, she could be landed directly on any planet with less than a 2G pole at the surface. The really big babies had to be parked in an orbit and loaded by shuttle. They'd break up of their own weight if they tried to set down on anything bigger than a good-sized planetoid. As long as their anti-acceleration fields were on, they could take unimaginable thrusts along their axis, but the AA fields were the cause of those thrusts as well as the protection against them. The ships couldn't stand still while they were operating, so they were no protection at all against a planet's gravity. But a blaster boat was small enough and compact enough to take the strain. It had taken careful preparation to get the Manila ready to go just exactly when McMain needed it. Papers had to be forged and put into the chain of command communication at precisely the right times. Others had to be taken out and replaced with harmless near-duplicates so that the commanding staff wouldn't discover the deception. He had to build up the fictional identity of a General Lucius Quimby in such a way that it would take a thorough check to discover that the officer who had been put in command of the Manila was non-existent. It was 2 minutes until takeoff time when the staff car pulled up at the foot of the ramp that led to the main airlock of the ISS Manila. A young-looking captain was standing nervously at the foot of it, obviously afraid that his new commander might be late for the takeoff, and wondering what sort of decision he would have to make if the general wasn't there at takeoff time. McMain could imagine his feelings. General Quimby developed another sneezing fit as he stepped out of the car. This was the touchiest part of McMain's plan, the weakest link in the whole chain of action. For a space of perhaps a minute, the disguised Karothai general would have to stand so close to the young captain that the crudity of his makeup job would be detectable. He had to keep that handkerchief over his face, and yet do it in such a way that it would seem natural. As Tallis climbed out of the car, chuffing windily into the kerchief, McMain snapped an order to the sergeant behind the wheel. "That's all. We're taking off almost immediately, so get that car out of here." Then he walked rapidly over to the captain who had snapped to attention. There was a definite look of relief on his face now that he knew his commander was on time. "All ready for takeoff, Captain? Everything checked out? Ammunition? Energy packs all filled to capacity? All the crew aboard? Full rations and stores stowed away?" The captain kept his eyes on McMain's face as he answered, "Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir," to the rapid fire of questions. He had no time to shift his gaze to the face of his new CO, who was snuffling his way toward the foot of the landing ramp. McMain kept firing questions until Tallis was halfway up the ramp. Then he said, "Oh, by the way, Captain, was the large package containing General Quimby's personal gear brought aboard?" "The big package? Yes, sir. About 15 minutes ago." "Good," said McMain. He looked up the ramp. "Are there any special orders at this time, sir?" he asked. "No," said Tallis without turning. "Carry on, Colonel." He went on up to the airlock. It had taken Tallis hours of practice to say that phrase properly, but the training had been worth it. After Tallis was well inside the airlock, McMain whispered to the young captain, "As you can see, the general has got a rather bad cold. He'll want to remain in his cabin until he's over it. See that anti-coryza shots are sent up from the dispensary as soon as we are out of the solar system. Now let's go. We have less than a minute till takeoff." McMain went up the ramp with the captain scrambling up behind him. Tallis was just stepping into the commander's cabin as the two men entered the airlock. McMain didn't see him again until the ship was 12 minutes on her way, nearly 5 billion miles from Earth, and still accelerating. He identified himself at the door, and Tallis opened it cautiously. "I brought your anti-coryza shot, sir," he said. In a small ship like the Manila, the captain and the 7 crew members could hear any conversation in the companionways. He stepped inside and closed the door. Then he practically collapsed on the nearest chair and had a good case of the shakes. "So far, so good," he said. General Tallis grasped his shoulder with a firm hand. "Brace up, Sebastian," he said gently in Kerothic. "You've done a beautiful job. I still can't believe it, but I'll have to admit that if this is an act, it's a beautiful one." He gestured toward the small desk in one corner of the room and the big package that was sitting on it. "The food is all there. I'll have to eat sparingly, but I can make it. Now, what's the rest of the plan?" McMain took a deep breath, held it, and let it out slowly. His shake subsided to a faint, almost imperceptible quiver. "The captain doesn't know our destination. He was told that he would receive secret instructions from you." His voice, he noticed thankfully, was almost normal. He reached into his uniform jacket and took out an official-looking sealed envelope. "These are the orders. We are going out to arrange a special truce with the Kerothi." "What?" "That's what it says here. You'll have to get on the sub-radio and do some plain and fancy talking. Fortunately, not a man jack aboard this ship knows a word of your language, so they'll think you're arranging truce terms. They'll be sitting ducks when your warship pulls up alongside and sends in a boarding party. By the time they realize what has happened, it'll be too late." "You're giving us the ship, too?" Tallis looked at him wonderingly. "And 8 prisoners?" "9," said McMain. "I'll hand over my sidearm to you just before your men come through the airlock." General Tallis sat down in the other small chair, his eyes still on the Earthman. "I can't help but feel that this is some sort of trick, but if it is, I can't see through it. Why are you doing this, Sebastian?" "You may not understand this, Tallis," McMain said evenly, "but I am fighting for freedom. The freedom to think." End of Part 3. Part 4 of The Highest Treason. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Highest Treason by Randall Garrett. Part 4. The Traitor. Convincing the Kerothi that he was in earnest was more difficult than McMain had at first supposed. He had done his best, and now, after nearly a year of captivity, Tallis had come to tell him that his offer had been accepted. General Tallis sat across from Colonel McMain, smoking his cigarette absently. "Just why are they accepting my proposition?" McMain asked bluntly. "Because they can afford to," Tallis said with a smile. You will be watched, my sibling by choice. Watched every moment for any sign of treason. Your flagship will be a small 10-man blaster boat, one of our own. You gave us one, we'll give you one. At the worst, we will come out even. At the best, your admittedly brilliant grasp of tactics and strategy will enable us to save thousands of Kurothai lives, to say nothing of the immense savings in time and money. All I ask is a chance to prove my ability and my loyalty. You've already proven your ability. All of the strategy problems that you have been given over the past year were actual battles that had already been fought. In 87% of the cases, your strategy proved to be superior to our own. In most of the others, it was just as good. In only 3 cases was the estimate of your losses higher than the actual losses. Actually, we'd be fools to turn you down. We have everything to gain and nothing to lose. I felt the same way a year ago, said McMain. Even being watched all the time will allow me more freedom than I had on Earth, if the Board of Strategy is willing to meet my terms. Tallis chuckled. They are. You'll be the best paid officer in the entire fleet. None of the rest of us gets a tenth of what you'll be getting, as far as personal value is concerned, and yet it costs us practically nothing. You drive an attractive bargain, Sebastian. Is that the kind of pay you'd like to get, Tallis? McMain asked with a smile. Why not? You'll get your terms, full pay as a Kurothai general, with retirement on full pay after the war is over. The pick of the most beautiful, by your standards, of the Earthwomen we capture, a home on Karoth built to your specifications, and full citizenship, including the freedom to enter into any business relationship you wish. If you keep your promises, we can keep ours and still come out ahead. Good. When do we start? Now, said Tallis, rising from his chair. Put on your dress uniform and we'll go down to see the High Commander. We've got to give you a set of general's insignia, my sibling by choice. Tallis waited while McMain donned the blue trousers and gold-trimmed red uniform of a Kurothai officer. When he was through, McMain looked at himself in the mirror. There's one more thing, Tallis, he said thoughtfully. What's that? This hair. I think you better arrange to have it permanently removed according to your custom. I can't do anything about the color of my skin, but there's no point in my looking like one of your wild hillmen. You're very gracious, Tallis said, and very wise. Our officers will certainly come closer to feeling that you are one of us. I am one of you from this moment, McMain said. I never intend to see Earth again, except perhaps from space, when we fight the final battle of the war. That may be a hard battle, Tallis said. Maybe, McMain said thoughtfully. On the other hand, if my overall strategy comes out the way I think it will, that battle may never be fought at all. I think that complete and total surrender will end the war before we ever get that close to Earth. I hope you're right, Tallis said firmly. This war is costing far more than we had anticipated, in spite of the weakness of that is, of Earth. Well, McMain said with a slight grin, at least you've been able to capture enough Earth food to keep me eating well all this time. Tallis's grin was broad. You're right, we're not doing too badly at that. Now, let's go. The High Commander is waiting. McMain didn't realize until he walked into the big room that what he was facing was not just a discussion with a high officer, but what amounted to a court of inquiry. The High Commander, a dome-headed, wrinkled, yellow-skinned, hard-eyed old Kurothai, was seated in the center of a long, high desk, flanked on either side by 2 lower-ranking generals who had the same deadly, hard look. Off to one side, almost like a jury in a jury box, sat 20 or so lesser officers, none of them ranking below the Kurothai equivalent of lieutenant colonel. As far as McMain could tell, none of the officers wore the insignia of fleet officers, the spaceship and comet that showed that the wearer was a fighting man. These were the men of the permanent headquarters staff, the military group that controlled not only the armed forces of Karoth, but the civil government as well. "What's this?" McMain hissed in a whispered aside in English. "Pair up, my brother," Tallis answered softly in the same tongue. "All is well." McMain had known, long before he had ever heard of General Poland Tallis, that the hegemony of Keroth was governed by a military junta, and that all Kerothi were regarded as members of the armed forces. Technically, there were no civilians. They were legally members of the unorganized reserve, and were under military law. He had known that Kerothi society was, in its own way, as much a slave society as that of Earth, but it had the advantage over Earth in that the system did allow for advance by merit. If a man had the determination to get ahead and the ability to cut the throat, either literally or figuratively, of the man above him in rank, he could take his place. On a more strictly legal basis, it was possible for a common trooper to become an officer by going through the schools set up for that purpose. But in practice, it took both pull and pressure to get into those schools. In theory, any citizen of the hegemony could become an officer, and any officer could become a member of the permanent headquarters staff. Actually, a much greater preference was given to the children of officers. Examinations were given periodically for the purpose of recruiting new members for the elite officers' corps, and any citizen could take the examination once. But the tests were heavily weighted in favor of those who were already well versed in matters military, including what might be called the inside jokes of the officers' corps. A common trooper had some chance of passing the examination. A civilian had a very minute chance. A non-commissioned officer had the best chance of passing the examination, but there were age limits, which usually kept NCOs from getting a commission. By the time a man became a non-commissioned officer, he was too old to be admitted to the officers' training schools. There were allowances made for extraordinary merit, which allowed common troopers or upper-grade NCOs to be commissioned in spite of the general rules, and an astute man could take advantage of those allowances. Ability could get a man up the ladder, but it had to be a particular kind of ability. During his sojourn as a guest of the Kerothi, McMain had made a point of exploring the history of the race. He knew perfectly well that the histories he had read were doctored, twisted, and, in general, totally unreliable insofar as presenting anything that would be called a history by an unbiased investigator. But, knowing this, McMain had been able to learn a great deal about the present society. Even if the history was worthless as such, it did tell something about the attitudes of a society that would make up such a history. And, too, he felt that in general the main events which had been catalogued actually occurred. The details had been blurred and the attitudes of the people had been misrepresented, but the skeleton was essentially factual. McMain felt that he knew what kind of philosophy had produced the mental attitudes of the court he now faced, and he felt he knew how to handle himself before them. Half a dozen paces in front of the great desk, the color of the floor tiling was different from that of the rest of the floor. Instead of a solid blue, it was a dead black. Tallis, who was slightly ahead of McMain, came to a halt as his toes touched the edge of the black area. "Uh-oh, a balk line," McMain thought. He stopped sharply at the same point. Both of them just stood there for a full minute while they were carefully inspected by the members of the court. Then the High Commander gestured with one hand, and the officer to his left leaned forward and said, "Why is this one brought before us in the uniform of an officer, bare of any insignia of rank?" It could only be a ritual question, McMain decided. They must know why he was there. "I bring him as a candidate for admission to our in-group," Tallis replied formally, "and ask the indulgence of your superiorities therefore." "And who are you to ask our indulgence?" Tallis identified himself at length. Name, rank, serial number, military record, etc., etc., etc. By the time he had finished, McMain was beginning to think that the recitation would go on forever. The High Commander had closed his eyes, and he looked as if he had gone to sleep. There was more formality. Through it all, McMain stood at rigid attention, flexing his calf muscles occasionally to keep the blood flowing in his legs. He had no desire to disgrace himself by passing out in front of the court. Finally, the Karothi officer stopped asking Tallis questions and looked at the High Commander. McMain got the feeling that there was about to be a departure from the usual procedure. Without opening his eyes, the High Commander said in a brittle, rather harsh voice, "These circumstances are unprecedented." Then he opened his eyes and looked directly at McMain. "Never has an animal been proposed for such an honor. In times past, such a proposal would have been mockery of this court and this in-group, and a crime of such monstrous proportions as to merit excommunication." McMain knew what that meant. The word was used literally. The condemned one was cut off from all communication by having his sensory nerves surgically severed. Madness followed quickly. Psychosomatic death followed eventually, as the brain, cut off from any outside stimuli except those which could not be eliminated without death following instantly, finally became incapable of keeping the body alive. Without feedback, control was impossible, and the organism as a whole slowly deteriorated until death was inevitable. At first, the victim screamed and thrashed his limbs as the brain sent out message after message to the rest of the body, but since the brain had no way of knowing whether the messages had been received or acted upon, the victim soon went into a state comparable to that of catatonia and finally died. If it was not the ultimate in punishment, it was a damned close approach, McMain thought, and he felt that the word damned could be used in that sense without fear of exaggeration. However, the High Commander went on gazing at the ceiling, circumstances change. It would once have been thought vile that a machine should be allowed to do the work of a skilled man, and the thought that a machine might do the work with more precision and greater rapidity would have been almost blasphemous. This case must be viewed in the same light. As we are replacing certain of our workers on our outer planets with Earth animals simply because they are capable of doing the work more cheaply, so we must recognize that the same interests of economy govern in this case. A computing animal in that sense is in the same class as a computing machine. It would be folly to waste their abilities simply because they are not human. There also arises the question of command. It has been represented to this court by certain officers who have been active in investigating the candidate animal that it would be as degrading to ask a human officer to take orders from an animal as it would be to ask him to take orders from a commoner of the unorganized reserve, if not more so. And I must admit there is, on the surface of it, some basis for this reasoning. But again, we must not let ourselves be misled. Does not a spaceship pilot, in a sense, take orders from the computer that gives him his orbits and courses? In fact, do not all computers give orders in one way or another to those who use them? Why, then, should we refuse to take orders from a computing animal? He paused and appeared to listen to the silence in the room before going on. "Stand at ease until the High Commander looks at you again," Tallis said in a low aside. This was definitely the pause for adjusting to surprise. It seemed interminable, though it couldn't have been longer than a minute later that the High Commander dropped his gaze from the ceiling to McMain. When McMain snapped to attention again, the others in the room became suddenly silent. "We feel," the hard-faced old Karothi continued as if there had been no break, "that in this case we are justified in employing the animal in question. However, we must make certain exceptions to our normal procedure. The candidate is not a machine, and therefore cannot be treated as a machine. Neither is it human, and therefore cannot be treated as human. Therefore, this is the judgment of the Court of the In-Group. The animal, having shown itself to be capable of behaving in some degree as befits an officer, including, as we have been informed, voluntarily conforming to our custom as regards superfluous hair, It shall henceforth be considered as having the same status as an untaught child or a barbarian, insofar as social conventions are concerned, and shall be entitled to the use of the human pronoun he. Further, he shall be entitled to wear the uniform he now wears, and the insignia of a general of the fleet. He shall be entitled, as far as personal contact goes, to the privileges of that rank, and shall be addressed as such. He will be accorded the right of punishment of an officer of that rank, insofar as disciplining his inferiors is concerned, except that he must first secure the concurrence of his guardian officer, as hereinafter provided. He shall also be subject to punishment in the same way and for the same offenses as humans of his rank, taking into account physiological differences, except as hereinafter provided. His reward for proper service, the High Commander listed the demands McMain had made, are deemed fitting and shall be paid, providing his duties in service are carried out as proposed. Obviously, however, certain restrictions must be made. Colonel McMain, as he is entitled to be called, is employed solely as a strategy computer. His ability as such and his knowledge of the psychology of the Earth animals are, as far as we are concerned at this moment, his only useful attributes. Therefore, his command is restricted to that function. He is empowered to act only through the other officers of the fleet as this court may appoint. He is not to command directly. Further, it is ordered that he shall have a guardian officer who shall accompany him at all times and shall be directly responsible for his actions. That officer shall be punished for any deliberate crime committed by the aforesaid General McMain as if he had himself committed the crime. Until such time as this court may appoint another officer for the purpose, General Poland Tallis, previously identified in these proceedings, is appointed as guardian officer. The High Commander paused for a moment, then he said, "Proceed with the investment of the insignia." End of Part 4. Part 5 of The Highest Treason. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Highest Treason by Randall Garrett. Part 5. The Strategy. General Sebastian McMain, sometime colonel of Earth Space Force and presently a general of the Karothi fleet, looked at the array of stars that appeared to drift by the main viewplate of his flagship, the blaster boat Shudos. Behind him, General Tallis was saying, "You've done well, Sebastian. Better than anyone could have really expected. 3 battles so far, and every one of them won by a margin far greater than anticipated. Any ideas that anyone may have had that you were not wholly working for the Karothi cause has certainly been dispelled." "Thanks, Tallis." McMain turned to look at the Karothi officer. "I only hope that I can keep it up. Now that we're ready for the big push, I can't help but wonder what would happen if I were to lose a battle." "Frankly," Tallis said, "that would depend on several things. The main one being whether or not it appeared that you had deliberately thrown the advantage to the enemy. But nobody expects you, or anyone else, to win every time. Even the most brilliant commander can make an honest mistake, and if it can be shown that it was an honest mistake, and one furthermore that he could not have been expected to avoid, he wouldn't be punished for it. In your case, I'll admit that the investigation would be a great deal more thorough than normal, and that you wouldn't get as much of the benefit of the doubt as another officer might, but unless there is a deliberate error, I doubt that anything serious would happen." "Do you really believe that, Tallis? Or is it just wishful thinking on your part, knowing as you do that your punishment will be the same as mine if I fail?" McMain asked flatly. Tallis didn't hesitate. "If I didn't believe it, I would ask to be relieved as your guardian, and the moment I did that, you would be removed from command. The moment I feel that you are not acting for the best interests of Karoth, I will act, not only to protect myself, but to protect my people." "That's fair enough," McMain said, "but how about the others?" I cannot speak for my fellow officers, only for myself." Then Tallis's voice became cold. "Just keep your hands clean, Sebastian, and all will be well. You will not be punished for mistakes, only for crimes. If you are planning no crimes, this worry of yours is needless." "I ceased to worry about myself long ago," McMain said coolly. "I do not fear personal death, not even by excommunication. My sole worry is about the ultimate outcome of the war if I should fail. That, and nothing more." "I believe you," Tallis said. "Let us say no more about it. Your actions are difficult for us to understand in some ways, that's all. No Kerothi would ever change his allegiance as you have. Nor has any Earth officer that we have captured shown any desire to do so. Oh, some of them have agreed to do almost anything we wanted them to, but these were not the intelligent ones, and even they were only doing it to save their own miserable hides. Still, you are an exceptional man, Sebastian, unlike any other of your race as far as we know. Perhaps it is simply that you are the only one with enough wisdom to seek your intellectual equals, rather than remain loyal to a mass of stupid animals who are fit only to be slaves." "It was because I foresaw their eventual enslavement that I acted as I did," McMain admitted. "As I saw it, I had only two choices: to remain as I was and become a slave to the Kerothi, or to put myself in your hands willingly and hope for the best. As you—" He was interrupted by a harsh voice from a nearby speaker. "Battle stations! Battle stations! Enemy fleet in detector range! Contact in 12 minutes!" Tallis and McMain headed for the command room at a fast trot. The three other Kerothi who made up the strategy staff came in at almost the same time. There was a flurry of activity as the computers and viewers were readied for action. Then the Kerothi looked expectantly at the Earthmen. McMain looked at the detector screens. The deployment of the approaching Earth fleet was almost as he had expected it would be. There were slight differences, but they would require only minor changes in the strategy he had mapped out from the information brought in by the Kerothi scout ships. Undoubtedly, the Kerothi position had been relayed to the Earth commander by their own advanced scouts buzzing about in tiny one-man shells, just small enough to be undetectable at normal range. Watching the positions on the screens carefully, McMain called out a series of numbers in an unhurried voice and watched as the orders relayed by the Kerothi staff changed the position of parts of the Kerothi fleet. Then, as the computer-led Earth fleet jockeyed to compensate for the change in the Kerothi deployment, McMain called out more orders. The High Commander of Keroth had called McMain a computing animal, but the term was far from accurate. McMain couldn't possibly have computed all the variables in that battle, and he didn't try. It was a matter of human intuition against mechanical logic. The advantage lay with McMain, for while the computer could not logically fathom the intuitive processes of its human opponent, McMain could and did have an intuitive grasp of the machine's logic. McMain didn't need to know every variable in the pattern. He only needed to know the pattern as a whole. The Shudos was well in the rear of the main body of the Kerothi fleet. There was every necessity for keeping McMain's flagship out of as much of the fighting as possible. When the first contact was made, McMain was certain of the outcome. His voice became a steady drone as he called out instructions to the staff officers. His mind was so fully occupied with the moving pattern before him that he noticed nothing else in the room around him. Spaceship against spaceship, the two fleets locked in battle. The warheads of ultralight torpedoes flared their eye-searing explosions soundlessly into the void. Ships exploded like overcharged beer bottles as blaster energy caught them and smashed through their screens. Men and machines flamed and died, scattering the stripped nuclei of their component atoms through the screaming silence of space. And through it all, Sebastian McMain watched dispassionately, calling out his orders as 10 Earthmen died for every Kerothi death. This was a crucial battle. The big push toward the center of Earth's cluster of worlds had begun. Until now, the Karothai had been fighting the outposts, the planets on the fringes of Earth's sphere of influence, which were only lightly colonized, and therefore relatively easy to take. Earth's strongest fleets were out there to protect planets that could not protect themselves. Inside that periphery were the more densely populated planets, the self-sufficient colonies which were more or less able to defend themselves without too much reliance on space fleets as such. But now that the backbone of the Earth's space force had been all but broken, it would be a relatively easy matter to mop up planet after planet, since each one could be surrounded separately, pounded into surrender, and secured before going on to the next. That at least had been the original Karothai intention, but McMain had told them that there was another way, a way which, if it succeeded, would save time, lives, and money for the Karothai. And, if it failed, McMain said, they would be no worse off. They would simply have to resume the original plan. Now the first of the big colony planets was to be taken. When the protecting Earth fleet was reduced to tatters, the Karothai would go on to Houston's world as the first step in the big push toward Earth itself. But McMain wasn't thinking of that phase of the war. That was still in the future, while the hellish space battle was still at hand. He lost track of time as he watched the Karothai fleet take advantage of their superior tactical position and tear the Earth fleet to bits. Not until he saw the remains of the Earth fleet turn tail and run did he realize that the battle had been won. The Karothai fleet consolidated itself. There was no point in pursuing the fleeting Earth ships. That would only break up the solidity of the Karothai deployment. The losers could afford to scatter. The winners could not. Early in the war, the Karothai had used that trick against Earth. The Karothai had broken and fled, and the Earth fleet had split up to chase them down. The scattered Earth ships had suddenly found that they had been led into traps composed of hidden clusters of Karothai ships. Naturally, the trick had never worked again for either side. "All right," McMain said when it was all over. "Let's get on to Houston's world." The staff men, including Tallis, were already on their feet, congratulating McMain and shaking his hands. Even General Hokotan, the headquarters staff man who had been transferred temporarily to the fleet force to keep an eye on both McMain and Tallis, was enthusiastically pounding McMain's shoulder. No one aboard was supposed to know that Hokotan was a headquarters officer, but McMain had spotted the spy rather easily. There was a difference between the fighters of the fleet and the politicos of headquarters. The politicos were no harder, perhaps, nor more ruthless than the fighters, but they were of a different breed. Theirs was the ruthlessness of the bully who steps on those who are weaker, rather than the ruthlessness of the man who kills only to win a battle. McMain had the feeling that the headquarters staff preferred to spend their time browbeating their underlings rather than risk their necks with someone who could fight back, however weakly. General Hokotan seemed to have more of the fighting quality than most HQ men, but he wasn't a fleet officer at heart. He couldn't be compared to Tallis without looking small and mean. As a matter of cold fact, very few of the officers were in any way comparable to Tallis, not even the fleet men. The more McMain learned of the Karothai, the more he realized just how lucky he had been that it had been Tallis and not some other Karothai general who had been captured by the Earth forces. He was not at all sure that his plan would have worked at all with any of the other officers he had met. Tallis, like McMain, was an unusual specimen of his race. McMain took the congratulations of the Karothai officers with a look of pleasure on his face, and when they had subsided somewhat, he grinned and said, "Let's get a little work done around here, shall we? We have a planet to reduce yet." They laughed. Reducing a planet didn't require strategy, only firepower. The planet-based defenses couldn't maneuver, but the energy reserve of a planet is greater than that of any fleet, no matter how large. Each defense point would have to be cut down individually by the massed power of the fleet, cut down one by one until the planet was helpless. The planet as a whole might have more energy reserve than the fleet, but no individual defense point did. The problem was to avoid being hit by the rest of the defense points while one single point was bearing the brunt of the fleet's attack. It wasn't without danger, but it could be done. And for a job like that, McMane's special abilities weren't needed. He could only watch and wait until it was over. So he watched and waited. Unlike the short-time fury of a space battle, the reduction of a planet took days of steady pounding. When it was over, the blaster boats of the Karothi fleet and the shuttles from the great battle cruisers landed on Houston's world and took possession of the planet. McMain was waiting in his cabin when General Ho-Katan brought the news that the planet was secured. "They are ours," the HQ man said with a superior smile. "The sniveling animals didn't even seem to want to defend themselves. They don't even know how to fight a hand-to-hand battle. How could such things have ever evolved intelligence enough to conquer space?" Ho-Katan enjoyed making such remarks to McMane's face, knowing that since McMaine was technically a Karothi, he couldn't show any emotion when the enemy was insulted. McMaine showed none. "Got them all, eh?" he said. "All but a few who scattered into the hills and forests. But not many of them had the guts to leave the security of their cities, even though we were occupying them." "How many are left alive?" "An estimated 150 million, more or less." "Good. That should be enough to set an example. I picked Houston's world because we can withdraw from it without weakening our position. Its position in space is such that it would constitute no menace to us, even if we never reduced it. That way, we can be sure that our little message is received on Earth." Ho-Katan's grin was wolfish. "And the whole weak-hearted race will shake with fear, eh?" "Exactly. Tallis can speak English well enough to be understood. Have him make the announcement to them. He can word it however he likes, but the essence is to be this: Houston's world resisted the occupation by Karothi troops. An example must be made of them to show them what happens to Earthmen who resist." "That's all?" "That's enough. Oh, by the way, make sure that there are plenty of their cargo spaceships in good working order. I doubt that we've ruined them all, but if we have, repair some of them. And, too, you better make sure that you allow some of the merchant spacemen to escape, just in case there are no space pilots among those who took to the hills. We want to make sure that someone can use those ships to take the news back to Earth." "And the rest?" Ho-Katan asked, with an expectant look. He knew what was to be done, but he wanted to hear McMaine say it again. McMaine obliged. "Hang them. Every man, every woman, every child. I want them to be decorating every lamppost and roof beam on the planet, dangling like overripe fruit when the Earth forces return." End of Part 5. Part 6 of The Highest Treason. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Highest Treason by Randall Garrett. Part 6. The Results. "I don't understand it," said General Poland Tallis worriedly. "Where are they coming from? How are they doing it? What's happened?" McMaine and the 4 Karothi officers were sitting in the small dining room that doubled as a recreation room between meals. The nervous strain of the past few months was beginning to tell on all of them. 6 months ago," Tallis continued jerkily, "we had them beaten. One planet after another was reduced in turn. Then, out of nowhere, comes a fleet of ships we didn't even know existed, and they've smashed us at every turn." "If they are ships," said Lupat, the youngest officer of the Shudo staff. Who ever heard of a battleship that was undetectable at a distance of less than 500,000 miles? It's impossible." "Then we're being torn to pieces by the impossible," Hokotan snapped. "Before we even know they are anywhere around, they are blasting us with everything they've got. Not even the strategic genius of General McMain can help us if we have no time to plot strategy." The Karothai had been avoiding McMain's eyes, but now, at the mention of his name, they all looked at him as if their collective gaze had been drawn to him by some unknown attractive force. "It's like fighting ghosts," McMain said in a hushed voice. For the first time, he felt a feeling of awe that was almost akin to fear. What had he done? In another sense, that same question was in the mind of the Karothai. "Have you any notion at all what they are doing, or how they are doing it?" asked Tallis gently. "None," McMain answered truthfully. "None at all, I swear to you." "They don't even behave like Earthmen," said the fourth Karothai, a thick-necked officer named Asif. "They not only outfight us, they outthink us at every turn. Is it possible, General McMain, that the Earthmen have allies of another race, a race of intelligent beings that we don't know of?" He left unsaid the added implication, "and that you have neglected to tell us about?" "Again," said McMain, "I swear to you that I know nothing of any third intelligent race in the galaxy." "If there were such allies," Tallis said, "isn't it odd that they should wait so long to aid their friends?" "No odder than that the Earthmen should suddenly develop superweapons that we cannot understand, much less fight against," Hokotan said with a touch of anger. "Not superweapons," McMain corrected almost absently. "All they have is a method of making their biggest ships undetectable until they're so close that it doesn't matter. When they do register on our detectors, it's too late. But the weapons they strike with are the same type as they've always used, I believe." "All right, then," Hokotan said, his voice showing more anger. "One weapon, or whatever you want to call it. Practical invisibility. But that's enough. An invisible man with a knife is more deadly than a dozen ordinary men with modern armament. Are you sure you know nothing of this, General McMain?" Before McMain could answer, Tallis said, "Don't be ridiculous, Hokotan. If he had known that such a weapon existed, would he have been fool enough to leave his people? With that secret, they stand a good chance of beating us in less than half the time it took us to wipe out their fleet, or rather, to wipe out as much of it as we did." "They got a new fleet somewhere," said young Lupat, almost to himself. Tallis ignored him. If McMain deserted his former allegiance, knowing that they had a method of rendering the action of a space drive indetectable, then he was and is a blithering idiot. And we know he isn't. All right, I concede that," snapped Hokotan. "He knows nothing. I don't say that I fully trust him even now, but I'll admit that I cannot see how he is to blame for the reversals of the past few months. If the Earthmen had somehow been informed of our activities, or if we had invented a superweapon and they found out about it, I would be inclined to put the blame squarely on McMain. But how would he get such information out?" Tallis cut in sharply. "He has been watched every minute of every day. We know he couldn't send any information to Earth. How could he?" "Telepathy, for all I know," Hokotan retorted. "But that's beside the point. I don't trust him any farther than I can see him, and not completely even then. But I concede that there is no possible connection between this new menace and anything McMain might have done. This is no time to worry about that sort of thing. We've got to find some way of getting our hands on one of those ghost ships." "I do suggest," put in the thick-necked Asif, "that we keep a closer watch on General McMain. Now that the Earth animals are making a comeback, he might decide to turn his coat now, even if he has been innocent of any acts against Keros so far." Hokotan's laugh was a short, hard bark. Oh, we'll watch him all right, Ossif. But as Tallis has pointed out, McMain is not a fool, and he would certainly be a fool to return to Earth if his leaving it was a genuine act of desertion. The last planet we captured, before this invisibility thing came up to stop us, was plastered all over with notices that the Earth fleet was concentrating on the capture of the arch-traitor McMain. The price on his head as a corpse is enough to allow an Earthman to retire in luxury for life. The man who brings him back alive gets 10 times that amount. Of course, it's possible that the whole thing is a put-up job, a smokescreen for our benefit. That's why we must and will keep a closer watch. But only a few of the Earth's higher-up would know that it was a smokescreen. The rest believe it, whether it is true or not. McMain would have to be very careful not to let the wrong people get their hands on him if he returned. "It's no smokescreen," McMain said in a matter-of-fact tone. "I assure you that I have no intention of returning to Earth. If Keroth loses this war, then I will die, either fighting for the Kerothi, or by execution at the hands of Earthmen if I am captured. Or," he added musingly, "perhaps even at the hands of the Kerothi, if someone decides that a scapegoat is needed to atone for the loss of the war." "If you are guilty of treason," Hokotan barked, "you will die as a traitor. If you are not, there is no need for your death. The Kerothi do not need scapegoats." "Talk, talk, talk," Tallis said with a sudden bellow. "We have agreed that McMain has done nothing that could even remotely be regarded as suspicious. He has fought hard and loyally. He has been more ruthless than any of us in destroying the enemy. Very well, we will guard him more closely. We can put him in irons if that's necessary. But let's quit yapping and start thinking. We've been acting like frightened children, not knowing what it is we fear, and venting our fear-caused anger on the most handy target. Let's act like men, not like children." After a moment, Hokotan said, "I agree." His voice was firm, but calm. "Our job will be to get our hands on one of those new Earth ships. Anyone have any suggestions?" They had all kinds of suggestions, one after another. The detectors, however, worked because they detected the distortion of space, which was as necessary for the drive of a ship as the distortion of air was necessary for the movement of a propeller-driven aircraft. None of them could see how a ship could avoid making that distortion, and none of them could figure out how to go about capturing a ship that no one could even detect until it was too late to set a trap. The discussion went on for days, and it was continued the next day, and the next, and the days dragged out into weeks. Communications with Keroth broke down. The fleet-to-headquarters courier ships, small in size, without armament, and practically solidly packed with drive mechanism, could presumably outrun anything but another unarmed courier. An armed ship of the same size would have to use some of the space for her weapons, which meant that the drive would have to be smaller. If the drive remained the same size, then the armament would make the ship larger. In either case, the speed would be cut down. A smaller ship might outrun a standard courier, but if they got much smaller, there wouldn't be room inside for the pilot. Nonetheless, courier after courier never arrived at its destination. And the Kerothi fleet was being decimated by the hit-and-run tactics of the Earth's ghost ships. And Earth never lost a ship. By the time the Kerothi ships knew their enemy was in the vicinity, the enemy had hit and vanished again. The Kerothi never had a chance to ready their weapons. In the long run, they never had a chance at all. McMain waited with almost fatalistic complacence for the inevitable to happen. When it did happen, he was ready for it. The Shudos, tiny flagship of what had once been a mighty armada and was now only a tattered remnant, was floating in orbit along with the other remaining ships of the fleet around a bloated red giant sun. With their drives off, there was no way of detecting them at any distance, and the chance of their being found by accident was microscopically small. But they could not wait forever. Water could be recirculated, and energy could be tapped from the nearby sun, but food was gone once it was eaten. Hokotan's decision was inevitable, and under the circumstances the only possible one. He simply told them what they had already known, that he was a headquarters staff officer. "We haven't heard from headquarters in weeks," he said at last. "The Earth fleet may already be well inside our periphery. We'll have to go home." He produced a document which he had obviously been holding in reserve for another purpose, and handed it to Tallis. "Headquarters staff orders, Tallis. It empowers me to take command of the fleet in the event of an emergency, and the decision as to what constitutes an emergency was left up to my discretion. I must admit that this is not the emergency any of us at headquarters anticipated." Tallis read through the document. "I see that it isn't," he said dryly. "According to this, McMain and I are to be placed under immediate arrest as soon as you find it necessary to act." "Yes," said Hokotan bitterly. "So you can both consider yourselves under arrest. Don't bother to lock yourselves up. There's no point in it. General McMain, I see no reason to inform the rest of the fleet of this, so we will go on as usual. The orders I have to give are simple. The fleet will head for home by the most direct possible geodesic. Since we cannot fight, we will simply ignore attacks and keep going as long as we last. We can do nothing else." He paused thoughtfully. "And, General McMain, in case we do not live through this, I would like to extend my apologies. I do not like you. I don't think I could ever learn to like a non-Karothi. But I know when to admit an error in judgment. You have fought bravely and well. Better, I know, than I could have done myself. You have shown yourself to be loyal to your adopted planet. You are a Karothi, in every sense of the word except the physical. My apologies for having wronged you." He extended his hands, and McMain took them. A choking sensation constricted the Earthman's throat for a moment. Then he got the words out, the words he had to say. "Believe me, General Hokotan, there is no need for an apology. No need whatever." "Thank you," said Hokotan. Then he turned and left the room. "All right, Tallis," McMain said hurriedly. "Let's get moving." The orders were given to the remnants of the fleet, and they cut in their drives to head homeward. And the instant they did, there was chaos. Earth's fleet of ghost ships had been patrolling the area for weeks, knowing that the Karothi fleet had last been detected somewhere in the vicinity. As soon as the spatial distortions of the Karothi drives flashed on the Earth ship's detectors, the Earth fleet, widely scattered over the whole circumambient volume of space, coalesced toward the center of the spatial disturbance like a cloud of bees, all heading for the same flower. Where there had been only the dull red light of the giant star, there suddenly appeared the blinding blue-white brilliance of disintegrating matter, blossoming like cruel, deadly, beautiful flowers in the midst of the Karothi ships, then fading slowly as each expanding cloud of plasma cooled. Sebastian McMain might have died with the others, except that the Shudos, as the flagship, was to trail behind the fleet, so her drive had not yet been activated. The Shudos was still in orbit, moving at only a few miles per second when the Earth fleet struck. Her drive never did go on. A bomb, only a short distance away as the distance from atomic disintegration is measured, sent the Shudos spinning away end over end, like a discarded cigar butt flipped toward a gutter. One side caved in near the rear, as if it had been kicked in by a giant foot. There was still air in the ship, McMain realized groggily as he awoke from the unconsciousness that had been thrust upon him. He tried to stand up, but he found himself staggering toward one crazily slanted wall. The stagger was partly due to his grogginess, and partly due to the Coriolis forces acting within the spinning ship. The artificial gravity was gone, which meant that the interstellar drive engines had been smashed. He wondered if the emergency rocket drive was still working. Not that it would take him anywhere worth going to in less than a few centuries. But then, Sebastian McMain had nowhere to go anyhow. Tallis lay against one wall, looking very limp. McMain half staggered over to him and knelt down. Tallis was still alive. The centrifugal force caused by the spinning ship gave an effective pull of less than 1 Earth gravity, but the weird twists caused by the Coriolis forces made motion and orientation difficult. Besides, the ship was spinning slightly on her long axis as well as turning end for end. McMain stood there for a moment, trying to think. He had expected to die. Death was something he had known was inevitable from the moment he made his decision to leave Earth. He had not known how or when it would come, but he had known that it would come soon. He had known that he would never live to collect the reward he had demanded of the Kurothai for faithful service. Traitor he might be, but he was still honest enough with himself to know that he would never take payment for services he had not rendered. Now, death was very near, and Sebastian McMain almost welcomed it. He had no desire to fight it. Tallis might want to stand and fight death to the end, but Tallis was not carrying the monstrous weight of guilt that would stay with Sebastian McMain until his death, no matter how much he tried to justify his actions. On the other hand, if he had to go, he might as well do a good job of it. Since he still had a short time left, he might as well wrap the whole thing up in a neat package. How? Again, his intuitive ability to see pattern gave him the answer long before he could have reasoned it out. They will know, he thought, but they will never be sure they know. I will be immortal, and my name will live forever, although no Earthman will ever again use the surname McMain, nor the given name Sebastian. He shook his head to clear it. No use thinking like that now. There were things to be done. Tallis first. McMain made his way over to one of the emergency medical kits that he knew were kept in every compartment of every ship. One of the doors of a wall locker hung open, and the blue-green medical symbol used by the Kurothai showed darkly in the dim light that came from the 3 unshattered glow plates in the ceiling. He opened the kit, hoping that it contained something equivalent to adhesive tape. He had never inspected a Kurothai medical kit before. Fortunately, he could read Kurothai. If a military government was good for nothing else, at least it was capable of enforcing a simplified phonetic orthography so that words were pronounced as they were spelled, and... He forced his wandering mind back to his work. The blow on the head, plus the crazy effect the spinning was having on his inner ears, plus the cockeyed gravitational orientation that made his eyes feel as though they were seeing things at 2 different angles, all combined to make for more than a little mental confusion. There was adhesive tape, all right. Wound on its little spool, it looked almost homey. He spent several minutes winding the sticky plastic ribbon around Tallis's wrists and ankles. Then he took the gun from the Kurothai general's sleeve holster. He had never been allowed one of his own, and holding it firmly in his right hand, he went on a tour of the ship. It was hard to move around. The centrifugal force varied from point to point throughout the ship, and the corridors were cluttered with debris that seemed to move with a life of its own as each piece shifted slowly under the effects of the various forces working on it. And, as the various masses moved about, the rate of spin of the ship changed, as the law of conservation of angular momentum operated. The ship was full of sliding, clattering, jangling noises as the stuff tried to find a final resting place and bring the ship to equilibrium. He found the door to Ossif's cabin open and the room empty. He found Ossif in Lupat's cabin, trying to get the younger officer to his feet. Ossif saw McMain at the door and said, "You're alive! Good! Help me!" Then he saw the gun in McMane's hand and stopped. It was the last thing he saw before McMaine shot him neatly between the eyes. Lupat, only half conscious, never even knew he was in danger, and the blast that drilled through his brain prevented him from ever knowing anything again in this life. Like a man in a dream, McMaine went on to Hokotan's cabin, his weapon at the ready. He was rather pleased to find that the HQ general was already quite dead, his neck broken as cleanly as if it had been done by a hangman. Hardly an hour before, McMaine would cheerfully have shot Hokotan where it would hurt the most and watch him die slowly. But the memory of Hokotan's honest apology made the Earthman very glad that he did not have to shoot the general at all. There remained only the 5-man crew, the NCO technician and his gang who actually ran the ship. They would be at the tail of the ship in the engine compartment. To get there, he had to cross the center of spin of the ship, and the change of gravity from one direction to another, decreasing toward zero, passing the null point, and rising again on the other side, made him nauseous. He felt better after his stomach had emptied itself. Cautiously, he opened the door to the drive compartment and then slammed it hard in sudden fear when he saw what had happened. The shielding had been torn away from one of the energy converters and exposed the room to high-energy radiation. The crewmen were quite dead. The fear went away as quickly as it had come. So maybe he dosed himself with a few hundred Roentgens. So what? A little radiation never hurt a dead man. But he knew now that there was no possibility of escape. The drive was wrecked, and the only other means of escape, the 1-man courier boat that every blaster boat carried, had been sent out weeks ago and had never returned. If only the courier boat were still in its cradle. McMaine shook his head. No. It was better this way. Much better. He turned and went back to the dining room where Tallis was trussed up. This time, passing the null G point didn't bother him much at all. Tallis was moaning a little, and his eyelids were fluttering by the time McMaine got back. The Earthman opened the medical kit again and looked for some kind of stimulant. He had no knowledge of medical or chemical terms in Kerothic, but there was a box of glass ampules bearing instructions to crush and allow patient to inhale fumes. That sounded right. The stuff smelled like a mixture of spirits of ammonia and butyl mercaptan, but it did the job. Tallis coughed convulsively, turned his head away, coughed again, and opened his eyes. McMaine tossed the stinking ampule out into the corridor as Tallis tried to focus his eyes. "How do you feel?" McMaine asked. His voice sounded oddly thick in his own ears. "All right. I'm all right. What happened?" He looked wonderingly around. "Near miss? Must be. Anyone hurt?" "They're all dead but you and me," McMaine said. "Dead? Then we better—" He tried to move and then realized that he was bound hand and foot. The sudden realization of his position seemed to clear his brain completely. "Sebastian, what's going on here? Why am I tied up?" "I had to tie you," McMaine explained carefully, as though to a child. "There are some things I have to do yet, and I wouldn't want you to stop me. Maybe I should have just shot you while you were unconscious. That would have been kinder to both of us, I think. But Tallis, I had to tell somebody. Someone else has to know. Someone else has to judge. Or maybe I just want to unload it on someone else. Someone who will carry the burden with me for just a little while. I don't know." "Sebastian, what are you talking about?" The Karothai's face shone dully orange in the dim light. His bright green eyes looked steadily at the Earthman, and his voice was oddly gentle. "I'm talking about treason," said McMaine. "Do you want to listen?" "I don't have much choice, do I?" Tallis said. "Tell me one thing first. Are we going to die? You are, Tallis, but I won't. I'm going to be immortal. Tallis looked at him for a long moment. Then, all right, Sebastian. I'm no psych man, but I know you're not well. I'll listen to whatever you have to say, but first untie my hands and feet. I can't do that, Tallis. Sorry. But if our positions were reversed, I know what I would do to you when I heard the story, and I can't let you kill me because there's something more that has to be done. Tallis knew at that moment that he was looking at the face of death, and he also knew that there was nothing whatever he could do about it, except talk and listen. Very well, Sebastian, he said levelly. Go ahead. Treason, you say? How? Against whom? I'm not quite sure, said Sebastian McMain. I thought maybe you could tell me. End of Part 6. Part 7 of The Highest Treason. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Highest Treason by Randall Garrett. Part 7. The Reason. Let me ask you one thing, Tallis, McMain said. Would you do anything in your power to save Keroth from destruction? Anything, no matter how drastic, if you knew that it would save Keroth in the long run? A foolish question. Of course I would. I would give my life. Your life? A mere nothing. A pittance. Any man could give his life. Would you consent to live forever for Keroth? Tallis shook his head as though he were puzzled. Live forever? That's twice or 3 times you said something about that. I don't understand you. Would you consent to live forever as a filthy curse on the lips of every Kerothi old enough to speak? Would you consent to be a vile, inhuman monster whose undead spirit would hang over your homeland like an evil miasma for centuries to come, whose very name would touch a flame of hatred in the minds of all who heard it? That's a very melodramatic way of putting it, the Kerothi said. But I believe I understand what you mean. Yes, I would consent to that if it would be the only salvation of Keroth. Would you slaughter helpless millions of your own people so that other billions might survive? Would you ruthlessly smash your system of government and your whole way of life if it were the only way to save the people themselves? I'm beginning to see what you're driving at, Tallis said slowly. And if it is what I think it is, I think I would like to kill you very slowly. I know, but you haven't answered my question. Would you do those things to save your people? I would, said Tallis coldly. Don't misunderstand me. I do not loathe you for what you have done to your own people. I hate you for what you have done to mine. That's as it should be, said McMain. His head was clearing up more now. He realized that he had been talking a little wildly at first. Or was he really insane? Had he been insane from the beginning? No. He knew with absolute clarity that every step he had made had been cold, calculating, and ruthless, but utterly and absolutely sane. He suddenly wished that he had shot Tallis without wakening him. If his mind hadn't been in such a state of shock, he would have. There was no need to torture the man like this. Go on, said Tallis in a voice that had suddenly become devoid of all emotion. Tell it all. Earth was stagnating, McMain said, surprised at the sound of his own voice. He hadn't intended to go on, but he couldn't stop now. You saw how it was. Every standard had become meaningless because no standard was held to be better than any other standard. There was no beauty because beauty was superior to ugliness, and we couldn't allow superiority or inferiority. There was no love because in order to love someone or something, you must feel that it is in some way superior to that which is not loved. I'm not even sure I know what those terms mean, because I'm not sure I ever thought anything was beautiful. I'm not sure I ever loved anything. I only read about such things in books. But I know I felt the emptiness inside me where those things should have been. There was no morality either. People did not refrain from stealing because it was wrong, but simply because it was pointless to steal what would be given to you if you asked for it. There was no right or wrong. We had a form of social contract that we called marriage, but it wasn't the same thing as marriage was in the old days. There was no love. There used to be a crime called adultery, but even the word had gone out of use on the earth I knew. Instead, it was considered antisocial for a woman to refuse to give herself to other men. To do so might indicate that she thought herself superior, or thought her husband to be superior to other men. The same thing applied to men in their relationships with women other than their wives. Marriage was a social contract that could be made or broken at the whim of the individual. It served no purpose because it meant nothing. Neither party gained anything by the contract that they wouldn't have had without it. But a wedding was an excuse for a gala party at which the couple were the center of attention, so the contract was entered into lightly for the sake of a gay time for a while, then broken again so that the game could be played with someone else, the game of musical bedrooms. He stopped and looked down at the helpless Karothai. That doesn't mean much to you, does it? In your society, women are chattel to be owned, bought, and sold. If you see a woman you want, you offer a price to her father or brother or husband, whoever the owner might be. Then she's yours until you sell her to another. Adultery is a very serious crime on Karoth, but only because it's an infringement of property rights. There's not much love lost there either, is there? I wonder if either of us knows what love is, Tallis. I love my people, Tallis said grimly. McMain was startled for a moment. He'd never thought about it that way. You're right, Tallis, he said at last. You're right, we do know. And because I loved the human race, in spite of its stagnation and its spirit of total mediocrity, I did what I had to do. You will pardon me, Tallis said, with only the faintest bit of acid in his voice, if I do not understand exactly what it is that you did. Then his voice grew softer. Wait. Perhaps I do understand. Yes, of course. You think you understand? McMain looked at him narrowly. Yes. I said that I am not a psychomedic, and my getting angry with you proves it. You fought hard and well for Carol, Sebastian, and in doing so you had to kill many of your own race. It is not easy for a man to do, no matter how much your reason tells you it must be done. And now, in the face of death, remorse has come. I do not completely understand the workings of the Earthman's mind, but That's just it. You don't, McMain interrupted. Thanks for trying to find an excuse for me, Tallis, but I'm afraid it isn't so. Listen. I had to find out what Earth was up against. I had a pretty good idea already that the Karothai would win, would wipe us out or enslave us to the last man. And after I had seen Karoth, I was certain of it. So I sent a message back to Earth telling them what they were up against, because up till then they hadn't known. As soon as they knew, they reacted as they have always done when they are certain that they face danger. They fought. They unleashed the chained-down intelligence of the few extraordinary Earthmen, and they released the fighting spirit of even the ordinary Earthmen. And they won. Tallis shook his head. You sent no message, Sebastian. You were watched. You know that. You could not have sent a message. You saw me send it, McMain said. So did everyone else in the fleet. Hokotan helped me send it, made all the arrangements at my orders. But because you do not understand the workings of the Earthman's mind, you didn't even recognize it as a message. Tallis, what would your people have done if an invading force, which had already proven that it could whip Karoth easily, did to one of your planets what we did on Houston's world? If the enemy showed us that they could easily beat us and then hang the whole population of a planet for resisting, why, we would be fools to resist. Unless, of course, we had a secret weapon in a hidden pocket the way Earth had. No, Tallis, no. That's where you're making your mistake. Earth didn't have that weapon until after the massacre on Houston's world. Let me ask you another thing. Would any Karothi have ordered that massacre? I doubt it, Tallis said slowly. Killing that many potential slaves would be wasteful and expensive. We are fighters, not butchers. We kill only when it is necessary to win. The remainder of the enemy is taken care of as the rightful property of the conqueror. Exactly. Prisoners were part of the loot, and it's foolish to destroy loot. I noticed that in your history books. I noticed, too, that in such cases the captives recognized the right of the conqueror to enslave them, and made no trouble. So, after Earth's forces get to Karoth, I don't think we'll have any trouble with you. Not if they set us an example like Houston's world, Tallis said, and can prove that resistance is futile. But I don't understand the message. What was the message, and how did you send it? The massacre on Houston's world was the message, Tallis. I even told the staff when I suggested it. I said that such an act would strike terror into the minds of Earthmen. And it did, Tallis. It did. But that terror was just the goad they needed to make them fight. They had to sit up and take notice. If the Karothi had gone on the way they were going, taking one planet after another as they planned, the Karothi would have won. The people of each planet would think, "It can't happen here." And, since they felt that nothing could be superior to anything else, they were complacently certain that they couldn't be beat. Of course, maybe Earth couldn't beat you either, but that was all right. It just proved that there was no such thing as superiority. But Houston's world jarred them. Badly. It had to. Hell does more than heaven can to wake the fear of God in man. They didn't recognize beauty, but I shoved ugliness down their throats. They didn't know love and friendship, so I gave them hatred and fear. The committing of atrocities has been the mistake of aggressors throughout Earth's history. The battle cries of countless wars have called upon the people to remember an atrocity. Nothing else hits an Earthman as hard as a vicious, brutal, unnecessary murder. So I gave them the incentive to fight, Tallis. That was my message. Tallis was staring at him wide-eyed. You are insane. No, it worked. In 6 months, they found something that would enable them to blast the Devil Karothi from the skies. I don't know what the society of Earth is like now, and I never will. But at least I know that men are allowed to think again, and I know they'll survive. He suddenly realized how much time had passed. Had it been too long? No. There would still be Earth ships prowling the vicinity, waiting for any sign of a Karothi ship that had hidden in the vastness of space by not using its engines. I have some things I must do, Tallis, he said, standing up slowly. Is there anything else you want to know? Tallis frowned a little, as though he were trying to think of something, but then he closed his eyes and relaxed. No, Sebastian, nothing. Nothing. Do whatever it is you have to do. Tallis, McMain said. Tallis didn't open his eyes, and McMain was very glad of that. Tallis, I want you to know that in all my life, you were the only friend I ever had. The bright green eyes remained closed. That may be so. Yes, Sebastian, I honestly think you believe that. I do, said McMain, and shot him carefully through the head. End of Part 7. Part 8 of The Highest Treason. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Highest Treason by Randall Garrett. Part 8. The End and Epilogue. "Hold it!" the voice bellowed thunderingly from the loudspeakers of the 6 Earth ships that had boxed in the derelict. "Hold it! Don't bomb that ship! I'll personally have the head of any man who damages that ship!" In 5 of the ships, the commanders simply held off the bombardment that would have vaporized the derelict. In the 6th, Major Thornton, the group commander, snapped off the microphone. His voice was shaky as he said, "That was close. Another second and we'd have lost that ship forever." Captain Varensky's oriental features had a half-startled, half-puzzled look. "I don't get it. You grabbed that mic control as if you'd been bitten. I know that she's only a derelict. After that burst of 50G acceleration for 15 minutes, there couldn't be anyone left alive on her. But there must have been a reason for using atomic rockets instead of their anti-acceleration fields. What makes you think she's not dangerous?" "I didn't say she wasn't dangerous," the major snapped. "She may be, probably is, but we're going to capture her if we can. Look!" He pointed at the image of the ship in the screen. She wasn't spinning now, or looping end over end. After 15 minutes of high acceleration, her atomic rockets had cut out, and now she moved serenely at constant velocity, looking as dead as a battered tin can. "I don't see anything," Captain Varensky said. "The Karothic symbols on the side." Palatal, unvoiced, sibilant, rounded. "I don't read Karothic, Major," said the captain. Then he blinked and said, "Shudos." "That's it. The Shudos of Karoth. The flagship of the Karothi fleet." The look in the major's eyes was the same look of hatred that had come into the captain's. "Even if its armament is still functioning, we have to take the chance," Major Thornton said. "Even if they're all dead, we have to try to get the butcher's body." He picked up the microphone again. "Attention, group. Listen carefully and don't get itchy trigger fingers. That ship is the Shudos, the butcher's ship. It's a 10-man ship, and the most she could have aboard would be 30, even if they jammed her full to the hull. I don't know of any way that anyone could be alive on her after 15 minutes at 50 Gs of atomic drive, but remember that they don't have any idea of how our counteraction generators damp out spatial distortion either. Remember what Dr. Pendrick said. No man is superior to any other in all ways. Every man is superior to every other in some way. We may have the counteraction generator, but they may have something else that we don't know about, so stay alert. I am going to take a landing party aboard. There's a reward out for the butcher, and that reward will be split proportionately among us. It's big enough for us all to enjoy it, and we'll probably get citations if we bring 'em in. I want 10 men from each ship. I'm not asking for volunteers. I want each ship commander to pick the 10 men he thinks will be least likely to lose their heads in an emergency. I don't want anyone to panic and shoot when he should be thinking. I don't want anyone who had any relatives on Houston's world. Sorry, but I can't allow vengeance yet. We're 1,000 miles from the Shudos now. Close in slowly until we're within 100 yards. The boarding parties will don armor and prepare to board while we're closing in. At 100 yards, we stop, and the boarding parties will land on the hull. I'll give further orders then. One more thing. I don't think her AA generators could possibly be functioning, judging from that dent in her hull. But we can't be sure. If she tries to go into AA drive, she is to be bombed, no matter who is aboard. It is better that 60 men die than that the butcher escape. All right, let's go. Move in." Half an hour later, Major Thornton stood on the hull of the Shudos, surrounded by the 60 men of the boarding party. "Anybody see anything through those windows?" he asked. Several of the men had peered through the direct vision ports, playing spotlight beams through them. "Nothing alive," said a sergeant, a remark which was followed by a chorus of agreement. "Pretty much of a mess in there," said another sergeant. "That 50G's mashed everything to the floor. Why'd anyone want to use acceleration like that?" "Let's go in and find out," said Major Thornton. The outer door to the airlock was closed, but not locked. It swung open easily to disclose the room between the outer and inner doors. 10 men went in with the major. The others stayed outside with orders to cut through the hole if anything went wrong. "If he's still alive," the major said. "We don't want to kill him by blowing the air. Sergeant, start the airlock cycle." There was barely room for 10 men in the airlock. It had been built big enough for the full crew to use it at one time, but it was only just big enough. When the inner door opened, they went in cautiously. They spread out and searched cautiously. The caution was unnecessary, as it turned out. There wasn't a living thing aboard. "3 officers shot through the head, sir," said the sergeant. "One of 'em looks like he died of a broken neck, but it's hard to tell after that 50G's mashed him. Crewmen in the engine room, 5 of 'em, mashed up, but I'd say they died of radiation, since the shielding on one of the generators was ruptured by the blast that made that dent in the hull." 9 bodies, the major said musingly. "All Karothi, and all of them probably dead before the 50G acceleration. Keep looking, Sergeant. We've got to find that 10th man." Another 20-minute search gave them all the information they were ever to get. "No Earth food aboard," said the major. "1 spacesuit missing. Hand weapons missing. 2 emergency survival kits and 2 medical kits missing. And, most important of all, the courier boat is missing." He bit at his lower lip for a moment, then went on. "Outer airlock door left unlocked. 3 Karothi shot after the explosion that ruined the AA drive and before the 50G acceleration." He looked at the sergeant. "What do you think happened?" "He got away," the tough-looking non-com said grimly. "Took the courier boat and scooted away from here." "Why did he set the timer on the drive, then? What was the purpose of that 50G blast?" "To distract us, I'd say, sir. While we were chasing this thing, he hightailed it out." "He might have, at that," the major said musingly. "A one-man courier could have gotten away. Our new detection equipment isn't perfect yet. But—" At that moment, one of the troopers pushed himself down the corridor toward them. "Look, sir! I found this in the pocket of the carrot skin who was taped up in there." He was holding a piece of paper. The major took it, then read it aloud. "Greetings, fellow Earthmen. When you read this, I will be safe from any power you may think you have to arrest or punish me. But don't think you are safe from me. There are other intelligent races in the galaxy, and I'll be around for a long time to come. You haven't heard the last of me. With love, Sebastian McMain." The silence that followed was almost deadly. "He did get away," snarled the sergeant at last. "Maybe," said the major, "but it doesn't make sense." He sounded agitated. "Look, in the first place, how do we know the courier boat was even aboard? They've been trying frantically to get word back to Karoth. Does it make sense that they'd save this boat? And why all the fanfare? Suppose he did have a boat. Why would he attract our attention with that 50G flare? Just so he could leave us a note?" "What do you think happened, sir?" the sergeant asked. "I don't think he had a boat. If he did, he'd want us to think he was dead, not the other way around. I think he set the drive timer on this ship, went outside with his supplies, crawled up a drive tube, and waited until that atomic rocket blast blew him into plasma. He was probably badly wounded and didn't want us to know that we'd won. That way we'd never find him." There was no belief on the faces of the men around him. "Why'd he want to do that, sir?" asked the sergeant. "Because as long as we don't know, he'll haunt us. He'll be like Hitler or Jack the Ripper. He'll be an immortal menace instead of a dead villain who could be forgotten." "Maybe so, sir," said the sergeant, but there was an utter lack of conviction in his voice. "But we'd still better comb this area and keep our detectors hot. We'll know what he was up to when we catch him." "But if we don't find him," the major said softly, "we'll never know. That's the beauty of it, Sergeant. If we don't find him, then he's won. In his own fiendish, twisted way, he's won." "If we don't find him," said the sergeant stolidly, "I think we better keep a sharp eye out for the next intelligent race we meet. He might find 'em first." "Maybe," said the major very softly, "that's just what he wanted. I wish I knew why." The End. The End of The Highest Treason by Randall Garrett.